You know that image, right? That shadow on the wall, the rat-like silhouette with those impossibly long fingers? It is one of the most iconic images in the history of horror. That's Nosferatu. But here's the thing. The creature you think you know is basically a ghost, cobbled together from a linguistic mistake, some serious post-war anxiety, and a legend that just refused to be burned. So let's dive into the incredible and totally misunderstood story of how this monster was really born.
We all think we know the story. This strange ship pulls into the harbor, and suddenly, out comes this flood of rats and a mysterious plague. Nosferatu is the literal personification of pestilence, a walking, breathing contagion. And the film makes it absolutely clear, wherever he goes, death is sure to follow. He's basically the Black Death given a monstrous, human-like form.
Well, the answer is so much more complex and, honestly, way more fascinating than just some filmmaker's nightmare. It's a journey that's going to take us from the battlefields of World War I to the terrified little villages of Eastern Europe and even into the pages of a mistranslated travel journal. So let's start peeling back the layers and find out where this thing really came from.
Okay, so first, you have to understand the world that created him. Nosferatu wasn't born in some ancient Transylvanian castle. He was born in the ashes of post-World War I Germany, a nation that was just haunted by millions of deaths, consumed by anxiety, and deeply, deeply afraid of foreign contagion. I mean, it was the absolute perfect breeding ground for a brand new kind of monster.
Now, the film's producer, a guy named Albin Grau, was a known occultist, and during the war, he heard this chilling story from a Serbian farmer about his own father being an undead vampire. That story just stuck with him, so after the war, he founded a studio called Prana Film, specifically to make supernatural horror movies. And Nosferatu, that was their very first and, as it turns out, their only creation.
And here is the first major twist in the story. Grau really wanted to adapt Dracula, but he couldn't get the rights. So they decided to just, well, do it anyway. They changed all the character names, the setting, key plot points, anything they could think of in a desperate attempt to avoid a copyright lawsuit. And that legal pressure is exactly what forced them to create a monster that was so completely different from Dracula.
And you can really see the result here. On one hand, you've got Stoker's Dracula. He's charming, he's tragic, he's an aristocrat. But on the other hand, you have Count Orlok. He's not some cursed man. The movie literally calls him a seed of Belial, a demon born from one of the lords of hell. He's not seductive. He's utterly grotesque and pestilent. He is pure, primordial horror, designed to repel you, not to attract you.
This whole look was a very deliberate choice to get away from the handsome Count. They gave him the features of a plague rat, the pointed ears, the long claws, that skeletal face. And they also invented a brand new rule that has defined vampires ever since. See, before this movie, vampires were nocturnal, sure, but sunlight didn't kill them. Nosferatu was the very first vampire in history to be utterly destroyed by the dawn.
But Orlok's whole plague carrier thing wasn't just a cinematic invention. No, it builds on something much, much older and way more real. To get it, we have to look at the roots of actual rural terror, where the original vampire was born.
So, forget the suave, aristocratic vampire for a second. Let me introduce you to the Strigo. This is the creature from Slavic folklore that genuinely terrified people for centuries. These were not charming noblemen. They were restless corpses that clawed their way out of the earth to bring sickness and death to their own families and their own villages.
And the descriptions of these original vampires are just horrifying. They were often described as these bloated, ruddy-looking corpses, just gorged on the life force of the living. This wasn't some gothic romance. This was a genuine public health fear. When a village suffered from some unexplained illness, they believed it was a vampire epidemic, and they would literally go dig up graves to find and destroy the strigoi they thought was responsible. This is the true folkloric root of Nosferatu.
Okay, so we have the look, we have the whole folkloric plague carrier concept, but what about the name, Nosferatu? Well, this might be the most surprising part of the whole story. The iconic name Nosferatu is actually based on a complete and total mistake.
We can trace the name back to one single person, a Scottish author named Emily Gerard. In an essay she wrote in 1885 about Transylvanian superstitions, she introduced the word Nosferatu to the English-speaking world, and she claimed it was the Romanian word for vampire.
Yeah, but she was wrong. What she probably heard was one of two Romanian words. Nesuferito, which means the insufferable one, or necurato, which means the unclean one. Both of them were common ways of talking about the devil.
So, through a simple mishearing, or maybe a slip of the pen, she basically created a brand new word, and that linguistic phantom became the legendary name for the Lord of the Undead.
And hey, this isn't just some theory. Modern linguists have confirmed it. The word Nosferatu doesn't actually exist in Romania. The name of the world's most famous vampire is, quite literally, a ghost word, a phantom that was born from a simple misunderstanding. Our monster's real name is the Insufferable One.
So we've got a creature born from war, from ancient folklore, and from a linguistic mistake. But the final piece of this origin story is, you gotta admit, maybe the most fitting part of all. Nosferatu's legend is defined by his uncanny ability to survive his own death sentence.
Remember that whole unauthorized adaptation thing? Well, Bram Stoker's widow, Florence, found out about it. She sued Pronafilm for copyright infringement, and she won. She completely bankrupted the German film studio in the process. But for her, that still wasn't enough.
The court's judgment was brutal and total. It ordered that every single copy of the film Nosferatu, the negative, all the prints, everything, be found and utterly destroyed by fire. The movie was officially sentenced to death. It was supposed to be completely erased from history.
But it didn't work. Just like the plague he carried on screen, the film had already spread too far. A few illegal prints had been smuggled out of the country, and they survived in the shadows, hidden in other places around the world. The monster escaped the flames. The film, just like the vampire itself, simply refused to stay dead. So the next time you see that iconic shadow, remember what you're really looking at. It's this incredible accidental mix, a name born from a mistake, a concept rooted in the real-world terror of the Strigoi, a form that was shaped by the trauma of a world war, and a legacy that was only secured because it somehow survived a court order to be burned from existence.
It really leaves you wondering, doesn't it? Nosferatu wasn't carefully designed in some writer's room. He was just assembled by accident, by fear, by chance. It makes you question the origins of all our myths. How many of the things that haunt our nightmares are born not from a single terrifying vision, but from the simple, messy, and often mistaken path of history itself?